Prashant. Welcome to Ideas of India, and thank you for being here. People who are watching in who just tuned in. Prashant works at MIT Playful Labs, and he has done an interesting work in education space in India, and that is why I wanted to have Prashant on the show. He earlier ran a company called Dramebaz, and we will learn about all this story. And when I say Idea of India, I really want to bring together people who can talk about different perspectives on where India is going, and whether that be education, whether that be entrepreneurship, and couldn't be happier than to have Prashant today talking about education. He also runs a podcast called Upepo, if I'm correct. Prashant, is that
No,
is
the podcast is called Our Neighborhood.
oh, is it okay?
Yeah,
But what
and
what
Upepo is something I'm starting, and I'll tell you more about it in due
uh,
course. But it's more around playful learning and stuff. Yeah.
got it, got it. So Prashant, let us rewind a bit. What has been your story? Where did you go to college for? And what happened after that? And when did TFI happen and the journey from then? So if you could just let our audience know about, how what has been the story really?
Yeah. So I'm from Bangalore. I very badly wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And as life would have it, I ended up starting my engineering right immediately after that. I started in I think 2010, and yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I very quickly figured out that it's not difficult to get a good score. And so after that, it was just like trying everything possible under the sun in college and stuff. I think that's when I stumbled upon uh, many interests. Photography was theater, so many of them, and there was this NGO called Make a Difference
Mm-hmm.
that I back then would have this deal where students from colleges who had like some experience in these could go teach kids in orphanages and stuff. So I went once to teach theater, and it was really nice. Then I was like, okay, this is fun. So I went back to teach photography. And then I think I started giving my parents a bit of a shock because I was spending too much time at like orphanages and NGOs, and there's this perception that you're going to become like this recluse who leaves everything and
The Jolawala. You are wearing a
yeah,
kurta.
exactly.
Kurta Jolawala dress. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then we got excited, but anyway, that program with Make a Difference was something I was like, okay, we need more of that. Like there wasn't enough of it, so a friend and I started something called the School Tree Project. I think in college, where the idea back then, which the college didn't let us do, but was can we crowd fund membership programs across the college where everyone would pay like 10 rupees a month or like 15 rupees a month. And we would use that to run orphanages, programs in orphanages where we could get people from like college to go and run things. But anyway, that didn't go down well because they were like, no, you're not taking money from students. But yeah, that was interesting. And then at which point I started seeing some previous seniors of mine doing this Teach for India fellowship. It was, I think, the right mix between something that was meaningful, something that was different, something that was rubbing my parents off exactly the wrong amount. so,
But
yeah,
was that a consideration really? Like, that rebel, I think everybody is a rebel, right? When they're just in college. This is the first
yeah.
thing, like parents can't tell you, hey, you need to do this. Was
No,
that
I think more like it wasn't there initially, right? But towards the end, when you start sitting for these like large placement drives, right? So you'll have like pre-placement talk and there's 800 people in the auditorium or like 1,000 people interviewing for like 500 jobs and things like that. That's when I don't know, for me that it kicked in at that point. I was like, I need to do whatever is like I'm the only one going towards college. Like nobody else should be going. So yeah, and anyway, so that's how I ended up in Teach for India. I taught third and fourth standard in Hyderabad. Yeah, so that was my
I,
foray
I
into.
remember we vaguely talking about your experiences at that Hyderabad school. I think demographically it was a very different. I think it was a municipal school, right?
Yeah, so I taught at a low income private school. And so for people who don't know, when we think of private schools, there's a perception of a private school across the world, right? And that's always of DPS, Oak Ridge, and large sprawling campuses, very spoiled children. Um, so I mean, I myself went to a KV all my life, and so I had a similar perception about private schools. But in India, it's like about roughly around 30% of all of our kids, which is 30% of 200 million or whatever, go to private schools, and these are ones that charge anywhere between like 10 rupees a month to 1,000 rupees a month. So and they will like rarely go beyond that in the affordable private school space, and there's like millions of them across the country. Each will cater to about like 500 to 1,000 kids kind of thing. And so the school that I taught in was similar. And it was like one of the oldest budget private schools in Hyderabad. And it was called ME Ideal School. Mohammad Anwar was the founder's name. And so yeah, he started it in his house, and over time, it's like he had like 9 schools in all slums around Old City in Hyderabad. Yeah, demographic was basically anybody in the area who had a daily wage.
Hmm.
So in general, if you did not have a stable daily wage, your kids will go to a government school. If you have a stable daily wage, you will do whatever it takes to put them into a private school. So whether it's waiters, auto drivers, construction labor, anyone who wanted a better life for their kids would. That was like the demographic of parents, and yeah, it's a
That is
different.
so interesting, right? When you, uh, I mean, even from like when we talk about India and we have, this way of segmenting people, bottom of pyramid and mass affluent and all of these, this difference that you just spoke about, like people who earn daily wage, they also have these two, like, whether the daily wage is regular or whether it is like, variable, and that determines school choices. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, and we noticed that typically, like if most parents, at least in the school, were auto drivers, waiters, and would be running some roadside
Eateries.
yeah, and like chaat bandi, or they'll sell like watermelon and all of that. So yeah, even within that again, there's so many like stratifications, right? So the roadside eatery is seasonal again. So you have some seasons where they have no business, so the kids don't come to school for those seasons.
Hmm.
And so there, most of these affordable private schools, in fact, in my view, are large philanthropies. Like it's one of the largest philanthropic networks because only 60-70% of kids pay fees at any given point of time. So most of the rest are in this thing where school owners are just like, it's okay, okay, we'll hold on for a few months, or we'll recover dues and we'll cover up. And anyway, so yeah, it's interesting.
Got it, got it. And I think that's why Dramebaz happened. I think you did do a trial version of Dramebaz in your high school.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so when I was teaching third standard, and for me it was a new. I mean, fresh out of college, you're full of energy and you want to make a difference. And also, I think it's a good time to teach third graders. And yeah, it was a whole different experience. I think like I hadn't anticipated just how many bathroom breaks I would have to give permissions for over the course of a day.
Right.
And yeah, and so the founder of the school is a visionary and had good ideas, and used to give us a he gave us a very long leash to try out a lot of things that I would say regular teachers in schools wouldn't be allowed to, because there was syllabus completion and this and that. So I had a lot of violence in the classroom, and this is not kids getting into fights. This is like a bunch of kids from one religion beating up the other one outside of school just because, like, and a lot of it was learned behavior. So we had some kids whose parents have seen another kid of theirs, get killed in riots, or I don't know, like it's so the kids had very strong biases for no reason. Like they didn't know why they had those biases, And at third grade, it's in my view, it's inexcusable for any society to allow kids to have those vices. So I was like, okay, what do we do? And we were many teachers, we were trying many things to just get kids to be less violent. I think so. So one of the things that Teach for India makes you do, and it's interesting, is you have to have a value system for your class, and you should keep driving it in while you're teaching.
Hmm.
And most classrooms, you would have compassion and empathy and mindfulness.
Yeah, the fancy words from US.
Yeah, and my class value for 2 years was non-violence. I was like, all you will do is not be violent. I don't care what else. You can lie, but please don't like maul each other outside the school or whatever. And so I think I reached a phase where nothing was working, and one that worked very well was I did theater a lot myself, and there's a lot of like research around the idea that theater allows you to practice an action before you take it.
Hmm.
So if you do a lot of theater, oftentimes you can it's very easy for you to place yourself in an actor's role doing something you're about to do.
Hmm.
Right. So whether it's you're telling off your boss or you're going to write like a nasty email to somebody just to get back at them. If my sense is if you did a lot of theater, you can play that scene up in your mind. You're like, if I write this, this is what they're going to say, this is what I'm going to say. And soon you won't write that email. So, or you'll word it very differently. So yeah, that was largely what I was trying to do with the kids in school. We tried to come up with a nice like theater curriculum for them. I was doing it strictly from this angle of kids thinking, okay, before I beat this kid to a pulp, I'm going to think what happens when his friends beat me up to a pulp like a few days later or something like that, right? And so yeah, it worked very well. Kids were a lot more thoughtful. I wouldn't say like, oh, suddenly everything stopped or everything changed or whatever, but there was some deliberation to thinking before acting on something or before saying something. At the same time, a friend of mine was using it for just reading comprehension, reading fluency, building that. Somebody was doing that in the classroom. And then we met at some event and we were just like, why don't we make this into a good curriculum? Because there seems to be a balance between children learning language and literacy skills and some life skills of uh, basically not beating each other up or thinking through an action before you do it and stuff.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah, that went well. We made a curriculum, we put it out. We had like I think 10 other fellows like participated the first year. Yeah, and then that sort of we were running it ish, but there were always fellows and teams of fellows who were taking it up in every city, and people were doing some wonderful work. I think we've put like maybe 5,000-6,000 kids on stage like every year for the last couple of years.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah, it
I
was fun.
actually have a question, and this is sort of a detour away from the main
Sure.
topic of education. But I do see a lot of these interesting experiments coming out of Teach for India, and I think the constant struggle there is how do we make this into a business, right? Whether it is a non-profit or for-profit, because school education is such, it's very difficult to. I mean, even if you look at, non-profits that have really scaled, whether it be Pratham or maybe Akshara, or I mean, there are very few, right? And if you see
Yeah.
the for-profit side, there's probably educational initiatives and a few more like that. And what I've seen in my experience is a lot of these amazing projects, right? Like they could probably change the way we learn. I mean, they could have really great impact, but often people struggle with looking at the business side of that thing. What is your take on that? Why is that? And how can we change that? Like,
Um, yeah, like I mean, I've been through this process of trying to build a nonprofit out of it, and I think that's probably when we met many years ago. But anyway, so I think number one uh, is, is is teachers are an odd group of people. Yeah, it's difficult for you to be business pragmatic because if you're a great teacher, then you're always tuned to saying that what is like 100% best for these kids, and so you develop a very like tunnel vision, and very few like break beyond that to be a little bit more pragmatic about okay, if I add a medal here or a trophy there or something or a certificate, then the chances that I could build something meaningful. I had that, maybe continue to have that in my head. So that's something I'm figuring out. Second piece I would say is non-profits. India is making it harder and harder for you to build non-profit. And it's something, there's a nice Shekhar Gupta one on the print about how every government, like it does across parties, across borders, doesn't, they're not too fond of non-profits across the world. It's you tend to question the government's stance on many things, and no government likes it. And so the non-profit route will become increasingly harder unless you're doing certain things that are expected of you as a
I mean,
non-profit.
as long as you stay away from, I think the socio-political. I mean, as long as your non-profit work is about, maybe teaching people about meditation or like something that has nothing to do with, education, health. I mean, people.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're saying, you're going to do AI to map water shortages across a certain, and that's safe territory. Like everybody is like helped out by that. But if you're saying that I'm going to build children who can think independently, that's a little bit harder to digest and always brings up questions saying, well, who are you to do this? Anyway, I digress. But so I think, yeah. So there's that whole piece of like, if you want to build a nonprofit, it's not easy. Like you need 3-4 years of they call it a fire in the belly. Like if you have that, then you can at least think of starting it. Just to go through legal procedures to set it up is a year's work. And I mean, how many of us out of college have that drive, right? So after a while, you're just like, okay, I'm not doing this. I already thought of this as
Yeah,
my idea.
and
I'm
the
going to do
life is happening, right? Like, I mean, you're falling in love, you're falling out of love.
yeah.
Like all of those coming of age things are happening, I'm sure.
Correct.
Um,
But I think now in today's world, like thinking deliberately about building a for-profit, it's more there's a greater upside to it. Like the chances that you can aspire for an acquisition, you can aspire to build some. The language is trickling down. You're seeing more examples of masteries and whiteheads, and you see more of it, so you feel like you can do more of it as well. I think so.
got it.
Hopefully, there will be changes, but I don't know.
Yes, that brings me back. I mean, we have very few minutes left, but I would love to learn about playful learning, right? Like, I think at MIT you approached assessments from a playful angle, and
Yes.
then of course you briefly mentioned Upepo. So, would love to know what is this playful learning? Can learning be actually joyful and playful for children, and can they actually learn?
Yeah, and I think the world's biggest example of playful approach to learning is Lego, right? And the more you read and you think about growing up with building blocks, one of the things about playing with building blocks, and I use that analogy for everything that you can possibly do, whether it's at a workplace, it's home, is that there are certain fundamental things you're playing with. In this case, it's square blocks or rectangles, and when you approach it, you're not approaching it with an end goal in mind. Like you start off and then and your blocks crash and someone's stolen a bunch of them, so you don't know what to do with it, and you've broken a few, so you somehow make do with it, and all the while you're approaching it, building it. Each time you're building something new on a building block set, it's a new canvas, right? You're approaching it from a very fun angle to build something, to play with something, etc. So I think that that's the basic issue with assessments that we were trying to solve. Right? Uh, you go into assessments today, whether at a workplace, if you're doing, a performance appraisal, or you're doing in a classroom, you're doing like
Hmm.
math exam at the end of the year. There is this holier than thou attitude that exams take, right? So there is one final truth, there is one final answer, and so as soon as you're done with exams and you enter the workplace, everybody realizes that there is no one truth, there is no one final answer. Someone else solved what code you were writing in a much faster way, in a different way, and something like that. So our big questions were two things. One, why are assessments summative, or largely they're summative? Even in today's world, it's like you do a period of learning and then you're assessed. And so the moment that
Formative
assessment,
is largely to pass students, right? Like,
yeah, and formative is what they've done is the idea is very different. And in India, or anyway, most of the world, formative assessment is more frequently done summative assessments. Like they're not looking at it in the sense of learning
that's interesting.
what you're doing along the way, right? So imagine where I mean, you're doing this interview series. Like, I could give you a test after 10 and then review you, and that's summative assessment. Formative assessment says after every three, I will still review you, but that's still not telling you how to get better. It's not telling you how to improve this show or how to get an audience or how to market it. I don't know, whatever, just an example, right? And I think, yeah, so what we were approaching it from the lens of that means assessment has to be embedded. So as you're learning, the teachers getting the information they require to understand whether you've mastered a certain outcome or not.
Mhm.
And you are getting the information you yourself need to make any corrective changes along the way, right? Um, so I'll give you an example of one tool that we use. It's very simple. Like today, assessment when you write it, it's two-dimensional, right? You're writing on a paper. At most, they'll ask you to draw something on the paper or sketch or something like that. But we found that if you just make it a three-dimensional activity for kids, so we use something called Stereocraft, which was a tetrahedron,
Mhm.
and you don't give them a prompt. It's just a tetrahedron that's cut out, and you can ask kids to write down while they're working on a project or while they're going through a course, write down what you've learned. Like it's a very vague prompt for kids, and they come up with beautiful answers like, oh, I learned this, I had fun, I did this, I did that. And then you fold it and it becomes a pyramid, right? So suddenly you can ask kids, be like, okay, what did you learn? And they have like a storytelling tool, like they have something tangible to hold and talk about what they learned.
Mhm.
And then in a group they realize that others learned the same things as them at some point, and then you can put them together. You can build like wonky shapes. Small corrective things like this that go from assessment to reflection. I think that is what we were pursuing, saying you don't need someone to assess you in the real world. It's largely you are reflecting on what's happening around you and then hoping to improve. But we don't do that for 16 years, and then suddenly you're expected to do it in your first performance appraisal. So yeah,
No, interesting. And what is Upepo, if you could tell us in a couple of minutes?
yeah. So all this while, I think I've this when we think of play and playful learning, we think of kids playing in a playground, right? And but more like there's a lot more research on playful approaches to things that you're learning with. And one of them is like, and I love people who like use like an Arduino or a microwave. These are often approaching it from saying, "Oh, I saw this cool project online. Let me just try it."
Hmm.
So Pepo sort of born from there. I'm thinking about how can let's do away with courses. Like I think courses are good and they have their place, but you learn a lot more when you're working on a project. You learn a lot more when there's a peer group that's working on a project with you. And this whole idea of finding something you're passionate about only comes about when you've worked on 5, 6 projects and you're like, oh, these two went really well, right? And whether you go to an investor, you go to an investment banker, anybody, everyone's learned on some project that went wrong, right? And that was like some of your biggest learnings. So I'm trying to see the whole like ideas. Can we get kids to stop about like, oh, here's a course and a certification on that, but like, oh, here's a fun project that you did and something you built, very hands-on, minds-on kind of thing. So yeah, to test that, we started off like a newsletter kind of thing, just to see if there are parents out there who would be interested in this, or like teachers who would be excited by the approach. Yeah, trying to do some pilots and stuff now to see if this is even worth, if it's pragmatic enough to do.
I think all questions in education come down to that, right? Like whether, I mean, as much as teachers love to teach, they also have to feed themselves. And uh, I have been in K-12 space for long enough to know that it is really tough. Um, Thank you, Prashant, for coming on and having just a great conversation. Thank you for that. Some of my key takeaways are obviously how you sort of segmented that, right? The daily wage, and even when we sort of try to say that, अच्छा ये bottom of pyramid market है India में, they have their own demographics and variations, and how those affect their choices. So was lovely to know that. And of course, playful learning. Would love for Upepo to do something with Stoa, where I mean, for Stoa fellows, maybe we can do something, right? We can do some project-based playful learning and maybe a
That
Sunday
sounds good.
experiment. Yeah. So thank you, Prashant, for tuning in. For others, do like, share, subscribe if
But
you
yeah, thank you.
yeah. Please do like, share, subscribe if you like this conversation and more conversations coming on from next week. Thank you for tuning in and thank you, Prashant, for being on Idea of India. Thank you.